Now the Constitution, memorizing the preamble to the Constitution, way simpler. It's just a short paragraph. But I'm going to tell you, studying the Constitution and the founding papers will be far richer when you understand and you can memorize the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. But in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, all the way down through, till it gets to the grievances. When you start studying, you're going to see things. I get all the time people ask me, where is it written in the Constitution that the military can take over the government when it becomes tyrannical until a new government can get set up? And I said, nowhere. Nowhere. It's not in the Constitution anywhere. I said, are you talking about the part that says that when any form of government becomes destructive at these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, instituting new government, setting its foundation in such principles and aligning its powers in such forms to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness? I said, is that the part? Yeah, that was the part they were talking about. Okay, that's not the Constitution. That's the Declaration of Independence. And there's many, many different ways to alter or abolish. There's many, many different ways to set new guards for their security, right? Those are principles. The 5th article of the Constitution is a way to alter, right? New legislation is a way to alter. Impeachment is a way to abolish or to reset new guards or to throw out bad guards, right? Now, just because we don't follow it and we don't do what we're supposed to do, that's shame on us, we the people. We were the government. We were supposed to hold our elected officials' feet to the fire. We were supposed to use the tool of shame, and we haven't. That's on us. That's not a flaw in our Declaration of Independence or a flaw in our Constitution. That's a flaw in us as free people because we got too comfortable being dependents on the government and not free. So, last week was Patrick Henry's Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death. Or I'm sorry, no, yeah, it was. Yeah. So we did the history, then we did Patrick Henry, or did we do Patrick Henry's?
Yes.
That was last week, right? So this is Declaration of Independence. So that's that history leading up to this. Now, as we read this Declaration of Independence, realize that all of the grievances in the center of this come from the British Bill of Rights of 1689, because King George is now under that. He's taken an oath to that British Bill of 1689 because the governmental structure in England is 100% a constitutional monarchy, right? And these are the things that they're complaining about, that they are British citizens and that they have tried all these different things that's allowed them by law under the British Bill of Rights of 1689, and they've had no relief. And that's what the Declaration is. A lot of people say that the Declaration of Independence is the birth certificate to America, and that's wholly not true. It's the Lee Resolution of July 2nd, 1776 that is the birth certificate to America. That's what made us no longer subjects under the king, but subjects under the law and free and independent people. The Declaration of Independence just is declaring to a candid world the reasons for our separation, right? At the beginning of it, it says, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them to another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they declare the causes which impel them to the separation. That's what the Declaration of Independence is. It's declaring the causes which impel them to the separation. The separation was the Lee Resolution of July 2nd, 1776. All right? So there's some things there's some history that we have to get into before we go through the Declaration of Independence. In Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. This is an overview. Before the Declaration of Independence, even after the initial battles in the Revolutionary War broke out, few colonists desired complete independence from Great Britain. Remember, there was a lot of Tories. There was more people that were proud British citizens that did not want to abolish the form that they had become accustomed to. And it says that in the Declaration of Independence, right? It says, prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light or transient causes. And he says, in fact, all experience hath shown mankind are more disposed to suffer evils, while evils are sufferable, rather than to right themselves and abolish the forms to which they become accustomed, right? So we will suffer with things even though we know they're wrong, because the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know, right? This is a self-evident truth. This is human nature. And so this was the same then. So you had a lot of people that even though they knew that the British government was treating them bad and that they had things bad, they really didn't want to right themselves in those forms that they had been accustomed to, right? And those who did, like John Adams, were considered radical. I get called that today, radical. Things changed over the course of the next year, however, as Britain attempted to crush the rebels with all the force of its great army. In his message to Parliament in October of 1775, King George III railed against the rebellious colonies and ordered the enlargement of the Royal Army and Navy. News of his words reached America in January of 1776, strengthening the radicals' cause and leading many conservatives to abandon their hopes of reconciliation. Right? This is what Patrick Henry's speech was all about. A lot of you are sitting here saying, peace, peace, but yet we have this whole fleet coming to our shore. They're not coming here to hug us. This is war. They are coming here to annihilate us. And that's what his speech was all about, rallying them to finally realize that their hopes and dreams of peace with the king were not going to come to fruition. Strengthening the radicals' cause and leading many conservatives to abandon their hopes of reconciliation. That same month, the recent British immigrant Thomas Paine published Common Sense, in which he argued that independence was a natural right and the only possible course for the colonies. The pamphlet sold more than 150,000 copies in its first few weeks in publication. Now remember, they didn't have Xerox machines and the internet. So that's a huge accomplishment, 150,000 copies. Think of that. In March 1776, North Carolina's Revolutionary Convention became the first to vote in favor of independence. 7 other colonies had followed suit by mid-May. On June 7th, the Virginia delegate Richard Henry Lee introduced a motion calling for the colony's independence before the Continental Congress when it met at the Pennsylvania State House, later Independence Hall in Philadelphia. Remember, that's that Lee resolution of July 2nd, 1776. Amid heated debate, Congress postponed the vote on Lee's resolution and called a recess for several weeks. Before departing, however, the delegates also appointed a 5-man committee, including Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, John Adams of Massachusetts, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, and Robert R. Livingston of New York to draft a formal statement justifying the break with Great Britain. That's that Declaration of Independence, a formal statement declaring to a candid world. That document would become known as the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson drafts the Declaration of Independence. Now, first, they wanted Benjamin Franklin, because Benjamin Franklin was quite an accomplished author at that point in time. And they wanted Franklin to do it. Now, Franklin was the oldest in the Constitutional Convention. He was in his 80s when everybody else was in their 30s and 40s. Franklin also knew something about himself. He didn't like people picking apart his writing. And so this was talked about in a couple letters. He got Jefferson to do it because he knew once Jefferson wrote it, and it went before the convention, that they would pick it apart. And Franklin said he didn't want him doing that to his writings, so he kind of conned the young kid to do it. Now, he helped him in it, but he knew that was going to happen. And Jefferson wrote later how he was a bit perturbed that they changed 20% of what he wrote. But 100% of what he wrote was plagiarized from those 5 genealogical documents and coming from that 700 years of history, all right? Jefferson had earned a reputation as an eloquent voice for the patriotic cause after his 1774 publication of A Summary View of the Rights of British America. and he was given the task of producing a draft of what would become the Declaration of Independence. As he wrote in 1823, the other members of the committee unanimously pressed on myself alone to undertake the draft. I consented, I drew it, but before I reported it to the committee, I communicated it separately to Dr. Franklin and Mr. Adams, requesting their corrections. I then wrote a fair copy, reported it to the committee, and from them, unaltered, to the Congress. As Jefferson drafted it, the Declaration of Independence was divided into 5 sections, including an introduction, a preamble, a body, divided into 2 sections, and a conclusion. In general terms, the introduction effectively stated that seeking independence from Britain had become necessary for the colonies, while the body of the document outlined a list of grievances against the British Crown. The preamble includes its most famous passage: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." And that right there in that one sentence is the very purpose for government. So when you have people running for office, you ask them, what is the very purpose of government? Their answer should be that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. That's it in a sentence right there. That's the crux of it right there.
Did Jefferson first draft life, liberty, and property, or was that prior to him?
That's prior to him. That's in other. He took that from the 5 genealogical documents as it come through. You'll find different parts of that in there, where even though the king had a divine right to rule, the people had a divine right to liberty. And what was that liberty? Well, over that 700 years, that liberty was defined down farther and farther and farther until it got to life, liberty, and property. Now, one of the reasons why he didn't say property in the Declaration of Independence is because they knew that they would have problems with the southern plantation owners, and they didn't want the slaves to be seen as property, because even in the Declaration, or even in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1, slavery was supposed to be over by 1808, because it had always been a British institution, never an American institution. And so they didn't want to put that property in there, so they put in the pursuit of happiness. Part of the pursuit of happiness is the ownership of property, and it's always been seen in the courts as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as property.
Just not another person.
Just not another person. The vote for independence. The Continental Congress reconvened on July 1st, and the following day, 12 of the 13 colonies adopted Lee's resolution for independence. The process of consideration and revision of Jefferson's declaration, including Adams and Franklin's corrections, continued on July 3rd and into the late morning of July 4th, during which Congress deleted and revised some 1/5 or 20% of its texts. The delegates made no changes to that key preamble, however, and the basic document remained Jefferson's words. Congress officially adopted the Declaration of Independence later on July 4th, though most historians now accept that the document was not signed until August 2nd by all of them. As the first formal statement by a nation's people asserting their right to choose their own government, the Declaration of Independence became a significant landmark in the history of liberty. In addition to its importance in the fate of the fledgling American nation, it also exerted a tremendous influence outside the United States, most memorably in France during the French Revolution. Together with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence can be counted as one of the 3 essential founding documents of the United States government. Lincoln said that it was the frame of silver, and that the Constitution was the apple of gold in that frame of silver. That frame of silver is the very principles. So the Declaration of Independence, the preamble, the beginning and the preamble, the introduction and preamble, give us the very principles of what our Constitution then came together and codified in articles, sections, and clauses. All of those principles are codified in that Constitution. Introduction. But in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. So that's what the Declaration is for. It's not the birth certificate to America. It's declaring to all the other sovereign powers in the world why we have separated and why we demand to be equal to them and sovereign as well as they are. Okay? Now remember, it's the British Bill of Rights that we studied that all these grievances come from. Now, we know the history repeats itself. And one of the things I caution everybody about is when we study history, we can't think of it as old guys in white wigs and things were different then. The human condition has never changed. The human condition is the same whether you're reading the Old Testament, the New Testament, or early American history, right? Mankind has not changed. The struggle is still the same. The principles are still the same. The sinful nature of man is still the same. So when we read history, we have to put it into today's context and understand it in that same way. Our technology may be different, the time may be different, but the human condition has not changed a bit. Body part 1. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. Do you think that happens today? Can you think of December 24th, 1913? Did that not happen on December 24th, 1913? If you remember your history, they were trying to pass the 16th and 17th Amendment, giving us a central bank and getting rid of and putting our senators under a popular vote of the people. And they kept fatiguing the legislature and fatiguing them and keeping them on Christmas Eve long into the night until they finally succumbed to vote for it so that Woodrow Wilson could get what he wanted. Is it any different than a king and a legislature back at this time? Sure isn't. Mankind hasn't changed a bit. He has, Patriot Act too, same thing, if you remember. Not the Patriot Act, I misspoke. Obamacare. If you remember, Obamacare was done the same way. You all remember that? Where did he get his playbook from? Woodrow Wilson, who got it from King George. Mankind has not changed. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with many firmness his invasions of the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions from within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization or foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the condition of new appropriations of land. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. Think about all the alphabet soup agencies in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. was an absolutely gorgeous district. 10 square miles. Our founding fathers laid that out. It was absolutely gorgeous with the buildings that were there and the monuments and the way it was all laid out. In the first, second, and third article, the Constitution gives us the very length and breadth of our government, which today should only be about 545 to 550 people. So tell me why the highways in Arlington, Virginia are packed every morning and evening with 4 million people coming into that 10 square miles and leaving. And now we've got all these horrible modern square buildings everywhere, and that city is disgusting. That district is disgusting now. Why is that? For the same thing. All those alphabet soup agencies that are there and making all these rules now, right? When the legislature should be writing the law, and they're not. It's the alphabet soup agencies. So have we erected a multitude of new offices and sent them hither swarms of officers to harass our people? Look at BATF. They have no authority in the sovereign state, but what do? We go, oh, well, it's the Commerce Clause. Well, we've read that wrong, so we've let them into our sovereign states in a place where they have no sphere of control. So we just don't learn. We're stupid. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. Now, if you remember history, that's why King Charles lost his head, right? Because he had martial law. And the marshals would go into the different shires and areas, and they would hold court, irrespective of the local authority. They didn't follow local authority. We don't like that. We don't like our military to be above the local authority rules, those spheres of control. We'll learn that in Federalist 39. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. Remember the Townsend Acts and some of those things where we started taking that tax money and it started going to Britain instead of taking care of the local governments like it was supposed to in the colonies. Body part 2. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us. What do we have in our Bill of Rights? Anybody? Article 3 of the Bill of Rights. Article 3 of the Bill of Rights, they cannot do that. For protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. Again, the same thing Charles lost his head for, because the military power, the martial law, took precedence over local authority. For cutting off our trade with all parts of the world. That was part of the Townsend Acts. For imposing taxes on us without our consent. For depriving us, in many cases, of the benefits of trial by jury. That comes to us all the way from the Magna Carta, right? That's a divine right of the people, trial by jury. For transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, being drugged to a foreign court, just as they tried to do to me just recently. Tried to pull me from my county and take me to a different county and make me answer to the court in a place where I'm not accused. For abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies. For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments. For suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. Now that comes up in Patrick Henry's speech, in all cases whatsoever. And you remember so that they would pull some of the taxes off, they agreed to a certain set of rules, and those same rules were used in Ireland, and Ireland was absolutely devoid of any power because Britain could make the laws and could decide everything in all cases whatsoever. Patrick Henry said that's slavery. If they can make all of the decisions in all cases whatsoever, that is slavery. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. That's another thing. Everybody remember Katrina, Hurricane Katrina. When that went through, they called out a lot of National Guard units, and a lot of National Guard units went down there to do some things. And supposedly, some police officers were shot at from a overpass. And they decided, well, if that's the case, they needed to go door to door and take weapons. So there's some people that have left their homes. They didn't have warrants, but they went in house to house and searched for weapons and took them so that they couldn't fall into the hands of the bad guys, okay? There was one situation where there was a little old lady, she decided to stay with her dog, and she had plenty of food and water to take care of herself, and she had an old revolver pistol. I think it was a .38. It wasn't even loaded. And they came house to house, and she was there, and they came in, they were talking to her, and she said, well, I've got plenty of food and water. They said, well, but you really should, leave because you know, you're not protected. And she said, I'm protected, and she held the gun up by the handle, and they wrestled her to the ground, dislocated her shoulder, broke 3 of her ribs, arrested her, took her out of there, left her dog there, and her dog starved to death, and that's the way it should be. Well, there was one National Guard unit that they went to, and they said, okay, you guys are going to go door to door with the police and do this. And there was one staff sergeant that had the fortitude to stand up and said, no, that violates the Constitution and my oath. I will not do that. And they said, well, we'll bring you up on courts martial. And he said, I guess you're going to have to, because